Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, what does it mean for a society when nearly 44% of its people fear the outbreak of a world war in the coming months? Well, a recent survey commissioned by the Polish media platform Onet and conducted by IBRiS found that a significant portion of the population is deeply concerned about global conflict. Now, with women expressing more fear than men and the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine and rising global tensions, these findings prompt urgent questions about the broader impact on Polish society, politics, and the economy. Now, to explore all this, we're joined by Dominika Blachnicka-Ciacek, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Migration Studies, University of Warsaw. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Good morning.
Now, Professor, let's begin with just the immediate results here. I mean, this is, I suppose, surprising. Do you find it surprising or not? I mean, we see that women have more fear here than men in this particular survey. So what is your first and major takeaway from this recent survey here in Poland?
Well, to your first question, I think it's understandable that Polish society as a whole is aware of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and people fear the potential threat coming from the East. So I think this is understandable. However, the same survey also tells us that people actually do not expect a direct invasion from Russia. Polls think that people in the Baltic states are much more prone to the direct Russian attack. However, of course, Poles do understand the serious situation in which we are, and all the efforts related to strengthening, for instance, the Polish eastern border are met with appreciation. At the same time, and possibly this is the most concerning result that I see in this survey, is that it seems, at least from this result, that Poles actually do not trust that the Polish army itself is ready and that it can be an effective force in deterring a potential Russian threat.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive in on that point. Why do you think that is? I mean, we know that, and we hear it all the time. We see it very much here in Poland as well. The world sees it. Poland is spending a lot more in defense, 5% nearly of GDP. When we see the new armaments, we see more growth in terms of the military. It's very public. So why is that fear, as you said, why is that most concerning? Does that stem from something different? How do you analyze that?
This is absolutely right. So Poland is spending a significant portion of its budget for military equipment and for being prepared. And at least from the survey, we see that people recognize this and accept this. Actually, this is one of the few results that tells us, that gives politicians a green light when it comes to boosting the public spending on the army. Yet, it feels that people see Russian military power as huge, and I think they are very aware that Poland alone would not be able to face this threat. This is why, and this is another result that we see in the survey, Poles strongly believe that NATO should be involved and that NATO's participation on the so-called Eastern flank is crucial for Eastern Europe's security and Polish security in particular.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit more, because I mean, if you have this sort of information, if you studied it some time, what about how has this changed over these last few years? And we know that this terrible war in Ukraine continues now, but has it shifted? Would this kind of result have been the same, let's say, 1 year ago, 2 years ago? How do you assess it? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? How do you take it if we compare it to the last few years?
Yeah, so as you rightly pointed, the war is still ongoing, but we are in the third year of the world war. So we do see in this result that people are kind of normalizing the ongoing war. So also, I think this is important. Poles feel that they have helped a lot, especially in terms of humanitarian aid. As you might remember, it was Polish civil society that in the first weeks and months of war has hosted large numbers of Ukrainian refugees, and perhaps people remember it and feel that they have delivered their duty. But also the situation coming from the front line makes people aware that it's very unlikely that the war will end this year. And it feels that on one hand, Polish society appreciates and understands the importance of Poland's engagement and support of the Ukraine. First of all, diplomatic support. And yes, we do see the drop of eagerness to support Ukraine when it comes to Polish military help and Polish humanitarian help and economic help. I think these results and this drop is also reflective of the recent election campaign, where it was only the so-called problematic issues related with Polish-Ukrainian relations. Some of the most concerning issues, for instance, in regards to Polish agriculture, have been flagged, and we see this in the results. So I also see this result as a red flag to Polish decision makers, because it feels that at this stage, in terms of Polish as Eastern European security, it's crucial to maintain this public support for supporting Ukraine, and what decision makers say matters. And we do see this drop in support, and this is and should be concerning for Polish decision makers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so interesting there, a red flag for Polish decision makers. They'll have to take this under advisement. I also want to ask a little bit more on the psychological impact of this. One, directly with citizens. I mean, fear, that's a natural thing to have and exhibit, but how do you think this is going to play out in, let's say, daily decisions? Will people become more risk averse or not, introverted, maybe more scared? And also on the economy, how is this going to impact economic behavior? I mean, usually when people are afraid they're not going to buy things, will they buy certain other things? So tell us a bit more about those two different lines of thought now.
This is an interesting question, because I think we see two contradictory drivers. So of course people are concerned and people are worried, understandably. We still see images of war coming from Ukraine, and the bombardment is not any lesser than it was 3 years ago, actually quite the contrary. So yes, there is sense of uncertainty and threat. And yet, as people in Ukraine, more so actually people in Ukraine, people have normalized that sense of risk and that sense of threat. And it feels this sort of threat and risk is now embedded in people's everyday lives. So in a way, we have learned how to sort of digest and live with this sense of insecurity. So yes, in some segments of Polish society, we see the eagerness to invest abroad, but for a large number of people focus on their everyday life, and the war is a factor, but it's not a life-changing situation for Poles at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also I'm just kind of thinking a little bit about in the past, if we look at countries that have, during the Cold War, also close conflict nearby, the threat of conflict nearby, if we look at South Korea, Taiwan, very resilient economies. So is this sort of do you see this a transition moment for Poles right now? How do you see this play out in the longer term, also for if there's a difference between older and younger generations?
Yes, to your last part of the question, I think, again, what we see in this result is that across different demographics, the results are quite similar when it comes to the broad picture that we are discussing. However, there is one segment of the population, and it's the young people that are really more skeptical towards helping Ukraine, towards sending military aid, towards supporting Ukraine military, and especially towards Ukrainian participation in the EU and NATO. Again, it might be reflexive of the recent election campaign and the surge of Konfederacja, political party, but we do see this sort of emergence of drop of political empathy towards Ukraine and Ukrainians fighting this war. And again, I see this as a concerning red flag, especially for Polish but also European decision makers that really need to make sure that the public support for aiding Ukraine is seen as a vital interest of not just Polish society, but of Europeans.
Mm-hmm. I know grouping young people, you mentioned the presidential campaign. We're looking probably at young voters between anywhere 18 to probably, let's say, late 20s. As you said there, the loss of political empathy, and that's interesting. What do you think, just briefly at the end now, what's behind that, and how can that be addressed with a frontline place like Poland is?
So again, it feels that the recent election campaign has not been helping because it was particularly a time in Polish politics where the discussion focused on sort of very narrow view, narrowly understood Polish interests. And some of the most divisive issues between Ukrainian and Poles have been sort of flagged and raised. There was a conversation about social benefits given to Ukrainians. And so these are the type of policies that are not very popular among Poles. And it's very easy to use these particular policies as an example that shows that, for instance, Ukrainians in Poland are receiving more support than their Polish counterparts, or this anti-Ukrainian sentiments are sort of boosted in order to gain sort of narrow particular political support. Mm-hmm. And this is something that has happened. This is something that has been happening. And again, it feels that we see the reflection of the sort of anti-Ukrainian sentiment in these results too. So this is what I call the sort of lack of our political empathy, where this kind of unconditional support for Ukraine is dropping.
Right. So I'm on that. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, there's so many more things to analyze to this, but really, really fascinating stuff. We'll have to close it there, unfortunately. But thank you so much for this really insightful conversation this morning about resilience, how Poles react. That was our guest here, Professor Dominika Blachnicka-Ciacek. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but much more coming up right here on TVP World, so stay tuned. Goodbye.